Hey guys, welcome to Figure It Out Farms YouTube channel. I'm Joe. This video I'm going to be making an egg holder that rolls the eggs down. We currently have one of those metal frame wire ones that goes in a circle, and it drives me nuts because all the eggs get stuck and they don't cycle through it properly. So Pinterest and my wife decided that I needed a new project. Here it is. So here I used my table saw to rip my plywood to 19 inches, and then I'm just using my circular saw to cut it to the 36 inches. This whole project's reused lumber, so I've got to remove some nails and make sure that I don't have anything in there that I don't want to hit with my table saw. As you can see, I'm kind of marking a bunch of stuff here, but I haven't really finalized any of the angles that I want these to run at yet. I'm just ballparking everything. Here's a nice view of my back. I was not paying attention when I set this one up, but you can see my angle finder there. I'm just rolling an egg down the ramp to see what angle it rolls at, and then marking that out to try and make it so the eggs roll but not too fast. Right here I'm marking my 2 inches up for the bottom corner of the second angled piece. This is to kind of lay it out so that once I start screwing everything together, I have a good starting point for that second piece to go on there and make sure I have enough space for the egg to roll between the two. So I kind of have everything laid out and mocked up here. I'm going to use my drill and pre-drill a hole underneath that line where my board sits, just with a tapered pilot bit. Those are really nice. I obviously don't want the countersink portion on the front of the board, but it will work on the back just to make sure I know where the screw needs to go on there. Might be worth mentioning that before I started this project, I measured the space that we wanted to put it so that I knew how big to make it. The dimensions are solely based on the space that I had. They could be made any dimensions that will work for whatever space you're trying to put it in. So here I'm about to realize that I screwed this top ramp on the wrong side of the line. There's a large gap. Definitely wasn't paying attention when I did that, and now I've got to redo it, so that's always fun. And there's a couple extra holes in the back of this now. I'm not too worried though, because I don't think you'll be able to see them. The angle that I settled on for these ramps at the time was 7 degrees. Might have been a little bit steep, probably could have got away with 2 or 3 degrees. If you start at the top of the ramp, the eggs really get going on the way down, kind of Humpty Dumpty when they hit the bottom if you don't catch them. Here I'm marking the ramps from the end of the plywood in the width of another 1x so that I can put a vertical 1x on each side and have them meet up nicely and go all the way from one side to the other. Over on my chop saw, just cutting a 7-degree angle on those to match the angle on the slope of the ramp to make sure everything kind of lines up nice. wish I could work this fast in real life. That would have made this go a lot quicker. Here I'm sanding everything while it's all apart to make it easier. I had some stain on the 1-bys that I needed to sand off because they were left over from another project. So cleared that off before I finished them, and labeled my pieces to make sure that I knew where they went and how to put them back on the board. Here I'm adding a third piece because after I talked to my wife, she was concerned about the capacity of just having 2 ramps. So she wanted a third one added. Obviously this one's not going to be able to go the full width of the board, just due to the real estate and the angle that it had to be at. So just making sure I double check my measurements and putting that back to try and match what I have on the other drop portion of this. For this third level, I was torn between making the angle correct and match the other angles, or having as long of a board on there as I could to increase the amount of eggs that I could have. I tried to maintain the 2 inches from the top of the plywood down. I ended up kind of splitting the difference between the angle and the space. I think I ended up with a 3-degree angle on that top section. I don't figure it's really going to be used much, so it shouldn't be a big deal. Here I'm putting some sample stains on a scrap piece of the 1-by to make sure that the stain that I pick meets the boss's approval. I have to make sure that I write down what the stain names are so that I can remember what ones to put on there. We ended up going with a golden oak. I decided to mix some metal in with this project, and I wanted the railing to keep the eggs from falling out to look like a split rail fence. So I have a plasma cutter. I designed it up and cut them out. Pre-drilled some holes in them. I went every other post. I just drilled a small hole in the bottom of it so that I could run a screw into the ramp piece when I was assembling it. So pre-drilled everything and then cleaned everything up with a grinder just to get all of the drops off. And here I'm just doing a test fit with a couple of screws to make sure that I got the angles right. Here I'm using a laser engraver to burn Figure It Out Farms, which is our homestead, into the backboard, and a little chicken, just to give it a little extra. I think it looks cool. So here's that all burned. I didn't quite like the way that it turned out. In person you can see a lot of the texture from the passes on the laser being spread out. So I'm going to sand some of the char off, and then I'm going to fill the indent from the burn with some paint. Here I'm going to apply the golden oak stain that I did a sample of earlier. I'm just going to apply it evenly to the whole back piece of the project there. I decided to stain the ramp portions a different color. I went with a black stain for those. Did that off camera. Here I'm filling in the portion I burned with the laser using white Rust-Oleum paint. Not sure if it would have been better to do this before I stained or after, so I went with after. in the hopes that doing it after the stain wouldn't get on the white paint and make it a darker color. Really wanted the white to pop. This process was pretty tedious. I started out trying to stay in the lines. Turns out I missed that day in kindergarten, so I ended up just slapping some paint in there, and then I'll sand it off after it dries. Then I'll have to reapply the stain after I do that. Here it is all painted. It doesn't really look that great here. After I sand it off, should look a little better. Should. Alright, so if you guys were paying attention before, you'd notice that I started painting it white, then I switched to black because the burn from the laser was showing through the white, and I didn't really care for it. So now I'm going to sand it off and show you what it looks like. Here I'm using my nylon brush and some compressed air to get the dust out of all the grooves in there. Once I sanded it, a lot of it got packed down into the grooves and it really kind of washed it out, made it blend in with the background, and I didn't like it. So I wanted to get as much of that out of there as I could. This worked out pretty good. After sanding off the excess paint, I did reapply the stain to make sure that it was all a uniform color on the back piece there, and then I started putting everything together. Here I'm applying the first coat of finish to this. Probably should have applied the finish before I put everything together, but I'm just figuring it out. So I decided to do it this way, and after this I'm going to use some steel wool to smooth out the rough texture of the finish, and then I'll apply a second coat. Alright, so I put a couple coats of finish on this project. Now I'm going to add the foam so that the eggs don't crack when they hit the ends or when they roll from one shelf to the other. The goal is to just line the corner so that it hits that and then hits it on the bottom. I'll see if I can adjust the camera without knocking it over. So I have a little one here. This one's gonna be just the stop for the end. And then these longer ones are gonna actually wrap the corner here so they're on the bottom and on the side. So I'm trying here to make sure that the foam stays in the middle of that board so that the smaller eggs don't go off the side of the foam and just hit the board. So I want to make sure that I center it in there so that it protects all of the eggs, even the smaller ones. So that foam was just some stuff I had from an AC unit I had bought, and then I used some 3M double-sided tape. It was not actually that easy to get the backing off of it. I cheated and did a lot of it off camera so that you guys didn't have to watch me mess with that. But here's what it looks like. So now I'm waiting for the paint on the rails to dry, and I'll show you the install of those. On these, I am making sure that I drill a pilot hole in the side of that ramp board, just because it is only 3/4 of an inch thick, and driving a screw in there otherwise is going to split it. So I'm doing those one at a time so that the rail doesn't move on me while I'm drilling the next hole. I also purposely ran these rails off or over the gap portion of that to try and make sure that the eggs didn't fall off of the board outward. There's different ways you can do it, but this is the best way I just figured would work. This is the finished product. I thought it turned out pretty good. My wife really liked it. Here's it installed behind the sink in her kitchen. This whole project was made from scraps I had in my barn, obviously besides the stuff that I had cut out. I know not everybody's got a cutter to do that, but this was something I thought would be fun, and I kind of wanted it to look like a split rail fence on there. Here's hoping that you guys found this video useful and could learn something from it. If so, come back and we'll do another random project.